I'm going to do a series of videos about when people first arrived in the Americas, how they got to the Americas, and when they actually arrived. I'm going to start with what has been the dominant theory for about 50 years. This is the Clovis first theory. I found this quote from a Spanish explorer very interesting. It most likely has nothing to do with how the Clovis theory was developed or how the land bridge theory was developed, but it may have been something that was in their minds. So when this Spanish explorer arrived in the New World in 1590 and saw the people of the New World, he wrote down, "These people are very primitive. They must have walked here." The origins of the Clovis first theory begin in 1908 with floods in northern New Mexico. The floodwaters turned up a large bison bone. This sparked interest in the area of what else could be uncovered and what was it related to, what culture was this from. In 1929, an amateur archaeologist, James Ridley Whiteman, dug up a flute point, and the flute point that he found is now the major artifact for all the Clovis sites. It ties all the Clovis sites together. The flute point was found alongside mammoth bones, which indicated that this flute point was from a culture that predated all known cultures at the time. Whiteman sent a few letters to the Smithsonian telling them what he had found and asking them to send someone out to help him. These letters were never answered, and it took until 1932 when the New Mexico Highway Department started to scrape a gravel area. This work turned up spearheads, stone tools, harps, flute points. This was enough to convince the Smithsonian to finally send someone out to help excavate the area. The Smithsonian sent out Dr. Edgar B. Howard of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Howard was sent to verify the finds, do further excavations, and to confirm where these finds fit on the current timeline. Howard was not so sure that these finds were from an earlier people. It took the discovery of a stone tool that was embedded into the ribcage of a mammoth to finally convince him that this was from an earlier people. As no dating technology existed, this find was what was needed to convince the Smithsonian and others that this was an earlier people that have not been documented yet. In the 1950s, the development of radiocarbon dating was introduced into the field. This allowed artifacts to be placed on a timeline. This dating technique was developed out of testing done on the atomic bomb. The dating for the Clovis sites was between 12,900 and 13,200 years ago. This established that the Clovis sites were before anything that they had known. And this will lead us to the next step of how they got to the Americas. So that's basically the Clovis first theory. Brings us to the land bridge theory. It is the explanation of how the Clovis people arrived in the Americas. The building blocks of this theory start in 1724. Russian Tsar Peter the Great asked Dutch explorer Vitus Bering to explore the Bering Strait area. He takes two travels to this area, one in 1724 and the next in 1741. On his voyages, he observes that people are crossing back between the land and water in this area. These observations are confirmed and mapped by Captain James Cook in 1778. Next building blocks for this theory came in the 1950s as David Hopkins was working in Alaska. He was able to help verify that the land bridge would have been opened before the Clovis culture was established in the Americas. This was done through dating of vegetation in a layer of ash in the Bering Strait. Hopkins used this data as well as data from other researchers to verify the land bridge could have been crossed at this time. Other researchers were looking at different land bridges around the world and when they were able to cross, and that research was pulled into the Bering Strait area to confirm that it most likely was open at this time. The theory states that early humans in Siberia and northern Asia followed large mammals across the Bering Strait into the Americas. As the Americas was covered in an ice sheet, an ice-free corridor must have existed that allowed the migration of people and animals to the southern U.S. and lower. Clovis sites have been found and identified across Canada, the US, Mexico, and South America. Dating of the flue points has been the main thing that ties all these sites together. Land bridge theory has been used to dispel and attack any finds that push the arrival of ancient humans to before the opening of the land bridge. There was the belief that ancient humans could not use the sea to travel from place to place, even though it has been accepted that Australia and islands around Japan were accessed through sea travel. Holes in the Clovis first theory developed early, but researchers that poked these holes were discredited, attacked, shut down, and lost funding. This approach to science is unacceptable. Research needs to be challenged, research needs to be looked at, but we should always be going deeper, looking into what is true and what actually happened. Just because something disagrees with what you think does not mean that it is wrong and does not mean it should not be accepted. The land bridge theory is also starting to show some holes. Recent studies of sediment cores and DNA have shown that the environment within the ice-free corridor would have been too harsh to pass. So not enough resources would have been available in the ice-free corridor to make stops along the way to get to more hospitable territory in the southern US and Mexico. Therefore, the Clovis culture may have not crossed the land bridge originally, but have come to the Americas another way. In the next video, I will start to look at archaeological sites that push back the date of arrival of an ancient culture in the Americas.